So it would appear that people kind of enjoyed my first Drinker Fixes video, where I did my best to sort out the unfunny walk-in joke that was Fat Thor from Avengers Endgame. But let's be honest here, in the great tapestry of narrative clusterfucks, Thor was at the shallow end of this particular pool. Now it's time to take the training wheels off and go after something a little more challenging. And what could be more challenging than this homeless, dishevelled Luke Skywalker imposter from The Last Jedi, Rian Johnson's 2.5-hour fuck you, sorry, I mean love letter to the Star Wars saga. Thanks, Movie Bob. It's fair to say that Rian's interpretation of Luke wasn't exactly a big hit with longtime fans of the franchise, or with Mark Hamill. The idea that the man who risked his life to redeem one of the most powerful and evil men who ever lived, ultimately saving the entire galaxy, would turn into a cowardly, pathetic, bitter old man who turns his back on everything he once swore to protect, didn't sit particularly well with a lot of people. Funny that. In fact, some even think it was a deliberate attempt to kill the legacy of their favourite hero in order to force them to accept the newer, stronger, more diverse protagonist brought in to replace him. Who knows? The real question here is whether it's possible to fix Luke Skywalker, giving us a character that's more faithful to the Luke we remember without completely altering the events of the movie. Well, let's find out with our next episode of The Drinker Fixes. So before we can start rewriting his character, first we need to understand what we've got to work with. Who is Luke in The Last Jedi? How does he begin? What does he do? And how does he end up? Well, we know from The Force Awakens that Luke has exiled himself to a remote planet, leaving behind clues to his location with two individuals he trusted deeply, so that he could be found and summoned back in the event he's ever needed again. But then The Last Jedi claims that he never wanted to be found by anyone, and he just wants to be left alone to die. So why did you leave a fucking treasure map behind for people to find you? It's almost like Rian Johnson took the plot threads from the previous movie and expertly ignored them. Anyway, whatever. The point is, Luke is living in a remote place that's intentionally very difficult to find. When Rey finally does show up to give him back his lightsaber, he throws it away like it's a piece of garbage so that Rian Johnson can suck his own dick about how much he subverted our expectations. Then he walks away and tells Rey to leave him alone. It's clear he doesn't want anyone around him, he's not interested in what Rey has to say, and he's turned his back on the Jedi and everything they represent. But Rey keeps pestering him, so eventually he agrees to train her by teaching her 3 lessons, even though he only actually gives her 2. And those lessons will explain why the Jedi are terrible, he's a failure, and you're a horrible person for not loving this movie. Fuck off, Rian Johnson! In the course of all this, we learn that this planet is the site for the first Jedi temple, where they keep a library of ancient books explaining the secrets of the Jedi faith. But apparently, in all his years on this island, Luke has never bothered to actually read them, because I guess he had more important things to do. I hate you with the dark fire of 1,000,000 exploding neutron stars. As all this is going on, Kylo and Rey communicate via the Force, and he hints that Luke isn't the man she thinks he is. This eventually results in a physical confrontation between Rey and Luke, which of course she wins, and forces him to admit the truth. Luke confesses that he tried to murder Kylo one night because he sensed him turning to the dark side, and that he pussied out at the last second, but Kylo woke up and kicked his ass and actually did turn evil as a result. This caused Luke to lose faith in himself, the Jedi, and everything else, so he abandoned everything he'd fought and worked for, closed himself off from the Force, and came to this island to die. Rey then tries to persuade him to go with her and help turn Kylo back to the light, but Luke refuses, so she leaves without him. Then a bunch of other really stupid stuff happens that I simply don't have the mental fortitude to face up to, and the action culminates in the Battle of Crate, where the outnumbered Resistance are about to be wiped out by the First Order. Luke force projects himself into the middle of the battle so he can confront Kylo Ren and buy time for the others to escape. Then he evaporates and dies. And so ends the story of one of the greatest characters in cinema. Jesus, I'm really gonna have to go some to fix this mess. Anyway, let's consider the key elements of Luke's story arc here and see if we can't make chicken soup out of chicken shit. 1. Luke's cut himself off from the Force and he's living alone on a remote planet, which is also the site of the first Jedi temple. 2. He does something unexpected when Rey hands him his lightsaber. 3. He's hostile at first, but reluctantly agrees to teach Rey some lessons. 4. He's hiding a dark secret about his past that only gets revealed after a physical confrontation, causing a split between them that results in Rey leaving the island without him. 5. He reconnects with the Force, shows up at the climax of the movie to confront Kylo Ren, and then he dies. Now, this may shock you to your core, but fundamentally, this isn't a bad character arc for him to go through. The idea of a supposedly wise and powerful mentor hiding a dark secret that threatens to undermine their students' faith in them is something you can do a lot with, if you're actually good at writing, that is. The problem with this version of Luke can best be summed up with one word: purpose. This man is completely devoid of purpose. He came to the island to die. He's not working towards any higher goal or trying to accomplish anything in particular. He's just running out the clock. This complete lack of purpose is reflected in his attitude towards Rey. He doesn't offer an alternative path or a different strategy to take on Kylo Ren. He just keeps telling her to leave him alone. When that doesn't work, he gives in and teaches her about the Force, but only to prove that the Jedi are bad and that she ought to leave them as they are. Dead. When Rey does resolve to leave and confront Kylo Ren, Luke tells her not to do it. Again, his outlook is entirely passive. He doesn't suggest an alternative idea. Instead, he wants her to do nothing at all. When she leaves anyway, he decides to burn down the Jedi Temple in his first act of genuine agency in the whole movie, but he can't even do that by himself. He stops and hesitates and lowers his head in shame and misery, so Force Ghost Yoda has to come and do it for him. What a fucking pathetic disaster of a man. His entire outlook is that the world is fucked, everything's hopeless, and there's nothing you can do about it, so don't even try. I could literally spend hours explaining how this is fundamentally wrong and insulting on every possible level. But I won't. The point I'm making here is that purpose is the biggest gap in Luke's character, and it's the reason he falls apart in spectacular fashion here. So purpose is going to be the foundation of how we build him back up. We know that Luke experienced a traumatic event linked to Kylo Ren, and as a result, he came to this island and intentionally made himself difficult to find. Naturally, he should be extremely wary of outsiders and new arrivals. But why here of all places, when there must be a million remote planets you could disappear in? Why come to the site of the first Jedi Temple if you're not going to make use of the very unique resources there? Unless, of course, we can find our own purpose for his presence here. So let's get started, shall we? The new story begins just as The Last Jedi did. Rey shows up on the island and holds out Luke's lightsaber to him, and there's a tense standoff as they face each other down, neither one making a move. We know something's about to happen, but we don't know what. Then, instead of throwing the weapon away, Luke force pulls the lightsaber out of her hand, ignites it and leaps at her, swinging the blade like he's about to strike her down, only to stop inches away from her neck. This is the last thing that Rey or the audience expected. Luke demands to know who she is, what she's doing here, and how she got her hands on his old lightsaber. And instead of fucking around with 20 minutes of pointless walking and green alien city milk, Rey stammers out a hasty explanation. She's frightened and intimidated by him, and it shows. She explains that Maz Kanata gave her the lightsaber, and when Luke questions where she got it from, Rey isn't able to answer, because that kind of thing is...
a good question. For another time.
This could even be played as a subtle joke at the expense of Force Awakens, giving the scene just a bit of levity. Luke clearly doesn't trust Rey, and it seems like he might actually strike her down. But then Chewie arrives, and this reassures him that Rey isn't his enemy. Powering down the weapon, Luke allows Rey into his home so she can bring him up to speed on what's been happening since his disappearance. He's devastated to learn that Han Solo is dead at Kylo's hands, and the First Order are now moving to take over the galaxy. Rey explains that she came here because they need Luke Skywalker to come back. With his help, they can turn Kylo back to the light and defeat the First Order. But Luke tells her that he can't leave this place, though he refuses to explain why. When he asks why Rey of all people was the one to come here, she tells him about her growing force powers that she doesn't understand, and suggests that perhaps Kylo was right about one thing after all.
You need a teacher!
She wants Luke to be that teacher. For a moment it seems like he wants to do it, but then his defenses go back up and he tells her bluntly that he's not interested in training any more Jedi. He failed Kylo Ren once and he won't risk doing it again. Rey tries to ask what happened, but he cuts her off and tells her to leave. Angered by his dismissal, Rey's force abilities manifest in an uncontrolled burst of power, damaging the hut they're in. Shocked and frightened by what happened, Rey retreats to compose herself. This gives Luke time to reflect on what he just saw. Recognizing how dangerous Rey could be to herself and to others if she doesn't learn to control her power, he realizes she does indeed need a teacher. Luke agrees to train her in the ways of the Force, explaining that the path to being a Jedi is difficult and requires hard work, discipline, and sacrifice. That's the only way she'll have a chance of defeating Kylo Ren. Rey throws herself into her training with determination, failing at first, but gradually becoming more disciplined as she learns to harness her force powers. She starts to bond with Luke through the process, learning to respect and look up to him as a mentor, and in turn, he warms to Rey, impressed by her resilience and seeing her as a chance to make up for his past mistakes. But unknown to Luke, Kylo Ren begins speaking with Rey through the Force, telling her she'll be the one to turn to the dark side, and that Luke isn't the man she thinks he is. Rey questions this, but Luke refuses to answer, saying that there are things she isn't ready to know yet. Being a Jedi means having patience and taking the longer, harder path to understanding. Unfortunately for Rey, time is running out. Her friends are in trouble and she can't afford to stay here much longer. Searching for her own answers to what really happened, Rey ventures into the cave beneath the island and sees a vision of Luke trying to strike down Kylo Ren. Confused and troubled by what she saw, she takes up Luke's blue lightsaber and confronts him, demanding answers. When she threatens him in an attempt to make him talk, Luke draws the green lightsaber he used to defeat Vader, and they engage in a short but intense duel. Having been trained by Luke himself, Rey initially does well against him, but her anger and emotion gets the better of her, allowing the Jedi Master to defeat and disarm her. This makes a lot more sense than the original version because it's consistent with what we know about these two characters. Rey has youthful strength and potential on her side, but Luke now has experience and hard-won wisdom. Luke explains that this is exactly why she isn't ready to face Kylo Ren again. She went to the cave against his instructions and allowed her emotions to overwhelm her. She's young and inexperienced and easy for someone like Snoke to manipulate. If she tries to face Kylo now, she'll end up either dead or turned to the dark side. When Rey demands to know if that's why Luke tried to murder Kylo in his sleep, like she saw in the vision, Luke finally reveals the truth to her. While he was trying to establish a new Jedi Order, Snoke became aware of his plans and reached out to him through the Force, just like he's been doing with Kylo and Rey, slowly poisoning his mind and convincing him that Kylo would turn to the dark side one day. Believing that Kylo was in danger, Luke went to his hut to warn him, only for Snoke to fill his mind with visions of Kylo murdering Han and Leia and destroying the Jedi. This terrifying vision caused Luke to ignite his lightsaber, but he realized that if he killed Kylo, he'd end up turning to the dark side himself, which is exactly what Snoke wanted all this time. At the last second, he's able to regain control of himself, but it's too late. Kylo mistakes his internal struggle for an attempt on his life, and things play out just as they did in the original version. Realizing he was vulnerable to future attacks that he might not be able to resist again, Luke cut himself off from the Force so that Snoke couldn't manipulate him and travelled to the Jedi Temple. For the past several years, he's been poring over the ancient Jedi texts, seeking a way to resist Snoke's influence so that he can return and try to put things right. But so far, he's been unsuccessful. What we have here is a similar chain of events to what happened in the original movie, only this time Luke's actions are put into a more logical context by some tweaks to his backstory and circumstances. He failed Kylo Ren because of the actions of the antagonist, not because of some unexplained flaw in his own personality that came out of nowhere. And he's on the island as a last resort to keep the people he cares about safe, not because he just gave up on them and wants to die. Naturally, Rey is gutted by this revelation. Not only has it shaken her faith in Luke and his teachings, but it's also convinced her that Kylo was a victim of circumstances and that he can still be saved. So she leaves the island and makes it aboard the Supremacy, just like before. Only this time, it happens at the climax of the movie, while the Battle of Crait is happening on the planet below. She makes her way to Snoke's throne room, intending to kill him and eliminate his influence over Kylo, hopefully stopping the assault before the Resistance are wiped out. Unfortunately for her, Snoke senses her presence and has Kylo waiting to ambush her. The two of them engage in a brutal lightsaber battle, with Rey trying her best to reason with him. But unlike the last time they fought, Kylo is now focused and ready for her. He's not conflicted like Rey expected, and soon enough he gains the upper hand, injuring her and destroying her lightsaber in the process. This scene would prove not only that Luke was right about Rey not being ready to take on Kylo Ren, but it would also allow his character to regain some much needed respect after losing to her in Force Awakens. With Rey defeated, Snoke orders Kylo to finish her, but just as he's about to strike, Rey tells him that Luke never intended to kill him that night. This revelation causes him to hesitate, questioning whether he might have been wrong about Luke all this time, but it's still not enough to sway him from the dark side, and he raises his lightsaber to strike her down. That's when Luke appears, force projecting himself into the throne room instead of the surface of Crait. He tells Kylo that he let him down and apologizes for giving up on him. Enraged by the appearance of his former mentor, Kylo attacks him. As Luke holds him off, he tells Rey to leave and save her friends on the planet's surface. She doesn't want to leave him, knowing that he's going to die here, but Luke assures her that they'll see each other again. Realizing she has no choice but to trust him, Rey leaves, arriving on the surface just in time to rescue the others from the mine, using the skills she learned with Luke to lift the rocks out of the way. Having held out long enough for Rey to get away, Luke stops fighting and tells Kylo that he intends to train Rey in the ways of the Jedi, and that the next time they meet, she'll be ready for him. Then his force projection fades away, leaving an angry but troubled Kylo behind. As a weary but defiant Luke recovers from the experience on his island, Rey and what's left of the Resistance arrive in the Millennium Falcon to bring him in. Luke has a reunion with Leia and tells Rey that he knows he can't hide any longer. He has no choice now but to stand and help them fight against Kylo and the First Order. The movie ends with the main characters looking out at the binary sunset, depleted and exhausted after their struggle, but determined to rise up again. Together. And that's it, that's pretty much what I've got. Now, I know there are elements in this new version that aren't exactly perfect. It requires a bit of rejigging of the final act of the movie, but I think it would result in a better paced and better structured finale. I'm also not a big fan of forced projection as a concept, but I think it works a little better here in this context, because it's revealed to be more of a cunning trick on Luke's part in response to a desperate situation, rather than something that gets him pointlessly killed for basically no gain. Also, I decided to keep both Luke and Snoke alive at the end of this movie. Much as Luke's death could have been poignant and meaningful, the real-life death of Carrie Fisher basically wrote Leia out of the sequel, so it would have been better to just have the character pass away between movies. Also, it does at least make sense for Luke to continue Rey's training in the following movie, and probably sacrifice himself at some point during that film to create a dramatic low point for the other characters to overcome. Also, Snoke is and should have been the main antagonist throughout this whole series. Killing him off for no purpose in Last Jedi was absolutely ridiculous, and forced the reintroduction of a dead antagonist from the original movies that was clearly never meant to be part of the sequel trilogy. But really, for something I came up with in the space of a couple of hours, it's not a bad starting point. My intention here is to show what Luke could have been if he was properly handled by a writer who actually cared about the character. You don't have to change the entire movie to make dramatic improvements to how he's presented. As I said at the start of this video, the character arc he goes through in this movie isn't all that bad, and it provides plenty of scope to do interesting things with him. What is bad is the way it's implemented. The way the character is constantly downplayed, downtrodden and disrespected, leaving us with a bitter, broken, defeated man with no dignity, purpose or agency. That's what Luke truly lacked in Last Jedi, and it's what I've tried really hard to give him here. I recognise that the heroes we grew up with as kids can't be our heroes forever. Sooner or later, their time has to come to an end, and it's only right that they make way for a new generation. But that doesn't mean that the essence of who they were has to be lost. It doesn't mean they have to abandon everything they once stood and fought and sacrificed for. They can be allowed to go out with dignity, pride and respect, passing on the torch to the next generation of heroes in a way that feels appropriate and meaningful, instead of trying to cynically tarnish their legacy to prop up the cheap carbon copies who simply don't deserve it. In fact, some guy named Tennyson summed this shit up better than I ever could when he said this: "We are not now that strength which in old days moved heaven and earth, but that which we are, one equal temper of heroic hearts, made weak by time and fate, but strong in will, to strive, to seek, to find, and not to yield." Anyway, that's all I've got for today. Go away now.